Now let's jump into God's Word today. We're kicking off a brand new series called All In. And I'm really excited because we're journeying through the life of one of my favorite characters, a life that Pastor Steve just read, the words out of the book of Numbers, the words that Moses spoke over Joshua, his prodigy, and one of the great leaders of the nation. And so we're going to be in Numbers chapter 13 this morning, and we're going to explore the life and a few stories from Joshua, the great servant of God. Now, there's a tragic story of a 60-year-old man that I just read by the name of Timothy Gray. Tragic story. In 2012, he was found deceased under a Wyoming underpass 2 days after Christmas. No signs of foul play, just a homeless cowboy who died of hypothermia. And normally, this kind of story would not even make the back page of the the newspaper, except for a few details to his story. Now, as it goes, Timothy he stood to inherit in his life millions and millions of dollars. His great-grandfather was a wealthy copper miner and a founder of a small town in Nevada. You might have heard of this town. This town is not so small anymore. It's Las Vegas. Might have heard of that. You might have been there this past holiday season. I saw some of your pictures. His great-grandfather's fortune was passed down eventually to his daughter. And in 2011, his daughter died at age 104 and left $300 million to the rest of the family members. And Timothy stood to receive $19 million to his name. Now, the person who wrote the report ended with these words, and they have captured my heart so profoundly. The author, the writer of this report, ended with these words: "How does the heir to a fortune die like a pauper?" And then he asked the question, if Timothy knew about it, I wonder, would it have changed the way he lived his life? Let me repeat those words again, that question. If Timothy knew about it, I wonder, would it have changed the way he lived his life? And I think that's a great question that we all need to wrestle to the ground when it comes to our faith and as we embark on 2022. I'm inviting us to wrestle that question to the ground. If you knew all that God had for you this year, how would it change the way you lived your life? If you sensed that God had something greater for you, how would it change the way you lived? If you felt that you were on the verge of a new opportunity, how would it change the way you lived? If you sensed that God could do so much more in your life and your career and your calling and your marriage and your relationship and your parenting, how would it change the way you lived? If you knew that God had deeper experiences of faith, that God wanted to take you so deep in your relationship with Him, that feeling when you first got to know God and you were on fire for Him, if you knew that God wanted to rekindle that, how would it change the way you lived? If you knew that God had deeper connections and deeper relationships and a deeper sense of fulfillment for your life, how would it change the way you live? And as a pastor, the reason why I want us to wrestle with these questions is because I've watched people visit the land of blessing, the promised land, but they don't live there. They're content being tourists instead of being residents. They go in and out of the promised land and the land of blessing, and somehow they think that that land and that place of blessing and that promise of God is not for them, it's for somebody else. It's like whenever we go to Hawaii. How many of you have been to Hawaii? It's like we love going to Hawaii. And inevitably, whenever we go to Hawaii, we land there. It's beautiful. You know, we get our coconut waters or pina coladas, whatever have you. And we inevitably say to one another, it would be so nice to live here. And it dawned on me, people actually do live there. Yeah, people do. They're called Hawaiians. Yeah. But we do that. We visit the land of blessing and the land of promise, and then we leave when God is calling us to live there. But how would it change the way we lived if you knew that God had something so much greater for you? And this is the story of Joshua, and this is the story of the nation of Israel. But before we dive into the book of Joshua, I want to give us the backstory of Joshua and his buddy Caleb, because it's remarkable. And the backstory of Joshua is found in Numbers chapter 13. So to catch us up, the Israelites are God's people, and they end up becoming slaves in a nation called Egypt. And Egypt is by far the most powerful nation. They are the superpower of the Old Testament. And Egypt, for the Israelites, was hell on earth, plain and simple. It was 400 years of oppression and death at the hands of Pharaoh. And God sees the plight of his people, and he hears their cries, and they're crying out to God for help, and God hears them. And God raises up Moses to deliver them from Pharaoh and from Egypt, to lead them into the promised land that was promised to the nation of Israel, all the way back to the book of Genesis, all the way back to Abraham. Remember Father Abraham? Had many children, and many... The land of promise. Now, you may be familiar with Moses, Charleston Heston, or Christian Bale, depending on your age, right? Moses, Big Mo. And so Moses leads the Israelites through the wilderness to the promised land. And along that journey, they encounter all sorts of obstacles. They encounter Pharaoh's marauding army that's after them. They encounter the Red Sea. They encounter the lack of food, and God provides. And in the midst of all those obstacles, God shows himself and demonstrates his power. God performs epic miracles. I mean, miracles of like divine proportions, to demonstrate that God is faithful and that God is able and that God was going to keep his word, that the God who delivered them from captivity is going to lead them into that land of promise. And so here they are on the final leg of their journey at a place called Kadesh Barnea. Say Kadesh Barnea. It sounds like somewhere in Escondido. Just kidding. So they're in a place called Kadesh Barnea, and they're on the verge of entering the promised land. In fact, it's only a few days' hike, they thought. And so to get them ready, to inspire the people, God has this idea. And he tells Moses, I want you to pick 12 men. Why 12? Because there were 12 tribes in Israel. And so in essence, I want you to pick one man from every tribe of the tribe of Israel, and I want you to send the 12 into the promised land as spies. In fact, I want you to send them to explore the land, just to inspire the people, to demonstrate how amazing this land is, so they can bring back a report of how great the promised land is. And 2 of the 12 spies were Joshua and Caleb. And when they explored the promised land, it was in fact awesome. It was amazing. In fact, it was everything that God told them it would be and so much more. We're going to read the description of what they find. And they even bring back these huge clusters of grapes to demonstrate how amazing this land was. Huge clusters of grapes, pomegranates, and figs. Just a side note, they did not bring back vegetables. And that just reinforces how amazing the promised land was. Grapes, figs, pomegranates, none of the broccoli stuff. I'm just saying. So vegan, that's not in the Bible. Anyways, I digress. So let's pick up the story in Numbers chapter 13, verse 25. Here's how it reads. At the end of the 40 days, they returned from spying out the land. Another translation would use the word explore instead of spying. Verse 26, and they came to Moses and Aaron and to all the congregation of the people of Israel in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh. They brought back word to them and to all the congregation and showed them the fruit of the land. And they told him, we came to the land to which you sent us. It flows with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. However, here's when the report turns negative. However, the people who dwell in the land are strong, and the cities are fortified and very large. And besides, we saw the descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites dwell in the land of the Negeb. The Hittites, the Jebusites, the Amorites dwell in the hill country. And the Canaanites dwell by the sea and along the Jordan. But Caleb, in fact, later on we find out it was Caleb and Joshua, quieted the people before Moses and said, let us go up at once and occupy it, for we are well able to overcome it. Then the men who had gone up with him said, we are not able to go up against this people, for they are stronger than we are. So they brought to the people of Israel a bad report of the land that they had spied out, saying, the land through which we have gone to spy it out is a land that devours its inhabitants. And all the people that we saw in it are of great heights. And there we saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak, who came from the Nephilim. And we seemed to ourselves like grasshoppers, and so we seemed to them. By the way, the Nephilim are from the tribe of Skywalker, and the Force was strong with them. No, just kidding. Just kidding. So how do we go all in with God this year? Because here's what I know, and here's my promise to you. If we go all in with Jesus this year, it will never be all for nothing. If you and I go all in with God this year, it will not be all for nothing. I promise that to you. We will experience the all in all of God's goodness and grace in our lives. So I wanted to present 3 questions for us as we've just read this story of Joshua and Caleb and the 12 spies. First question is this. As we look into this year and as we're challenged to change the way we live, to go all in with God, here's the first question. Whose word am I going to believe? First question for us. Whose word am I going to believe? I want to take us back to Numbers 13. Verse 1 says this. The Lord spoke to Moses saying, send men to spy out the land of Canaan, the promised land, which I am giving to the people of Israel. Look at that phrase, I am giving to the people of Israel. In other words, God is saying, I'm already going to do this. This has been decided. This has been determined. This has been part of my plan all along. This is going to happen without a shadow of a doubt. And the other thing about this is, it's not just any land. It's the promised land. In other words, it's not the probably land. It's not the I'm considering it land. It's not the I'm contemplating it land. It's not the let me think about it later land. It's not a if you behave good, I'll give it to you land. It is the promised land that I promised that I would give to your generation and your nation because you are my people. And I gave this promise thousands and hundreds of years ago through my servant Abraham. It is a done deal. So whose word are you going to believe? You see, whenever God calls us to do something that we don't think we can do, something bigger than our wildest dreams, something so God-sized, something that takes us faith, we have a choice to make. We have a decision to make. Do we trust him or not? Whose word are we going to believe? Are we going to believe the counsel of people, or are we going to believe the counsel of God? That's a question that we need to wrestle to the ground. When it comes to the hopes and dreams that God has placed in your life, about your family, about your calling, about your children, about your relationships, whose counsel are you going to believe? And here's what I know. We get it wrong almost all the time. People are just bad predictors of the future. We are not omniscient like God. We are not all-knowing like God. And so let's consider and let's trust the counsel of God. In fact, when we looked at history, there are numerous times in history that people were so convinced that they were right, and yet they were so wrong. Let me just give us a few examples. Thomas Watson, the chair of the board of IBM. Remember IBM? Yeah, the computer company. In 1943, here's what Thomas Watson said. He said, I quote, I think there's a world market for about 5 computers. So convinced that he was right, and yet he was so wrong. Here's another one. Business Week, 1968, said this, I quote, with over 50 foreign cars already on sale here, the Japanese auto industry isn't likely to carve out a big slice of the U.S. market. How many of you drive a Japanese car? How many of you drive a Honda Accord? Oh man, Jesus would be so proud because Jesus drove a Honda Accord. In fact, one time he said he was with his disciples and they were together in one accord. Oh, there you go. Okay, here's another one. There's more where that came from. The music recording label company Decca Records in 1962, when they first heard the Beatles, John, Paul, George, and Ringo, they said this: "We don't like their sound, and we think that guitar music is on its way out." They were wrong. Come on, get with the program. Rod Thorne, the general manager of the Chicago Bulls, Ray, you'll appreciate this, drafted Michael Jordan in 1984. But he did not hold out much hope for Michael Jordan. In fact, he said, "I wish Michael Jordan was 7 feet tall, but there just wasn't another center available in the draft." And then he ended with these words: "Jordan isn't going to turn this franchise around." He went on to become the GOAT, the greatest of all time. Here's probably one of my favorites. Billy Graham was once told, "You'll never make a preacher." And yet he preached to millions of people, and they've encountered Jesus because of his ministry. Here's what I know. The council of people, we're just not that great predictors of the future. So whose word are you going to believe? Are you going to believe the counsel of people? Or are you going to believe the counsel of God? Question number 2 for us. For us to go all in this year, here's the second question that we need to ask ourselves. What am I looking for? Not what am I looking at. What am I looking for? Look at these verses in verse 27. And they told him, the spies, they told Moses, "We came to the land which you sent us. It flows with milk and honey," just like you said. "This is its fruit." Amazing. It took 2 of them to carry a cluster of grapes. "However, the people who dwell in the land are strong. Cities are fortified. They're very large. Besides, we saw the descendants of Anak." They're like Skywalker. Verse 32. "So they brought to the people a bad report of the land that they had spied out, saying, 'The land through which we have gone to spy out, it's a land that devours its inhabitants.'" Look how ridiculous their report has gone. It devours people. Really? It devours? Really? What are we, Harry Potter? It devours people. Right? Where am I? I'm lost. That wasn't part of my notes. "It devours its inhabitants, and all the people that we saw there are of great height. And there we saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak, who came from the Nephilim, and we seemed to ourselves like grasshoppers. And so we seemed to them." How did they know that they looked like insects to the descendants of Anak? They didn't. It's projection. See, that's what fear does. It projects. Because when we read the story of Joshua, which we'll get to, we find out that the inhabitants of the land were in fact terrified of the Israelites because they heard of what God had done to Egypt and Pharaoh. But that's the voice of fear. So what you look for oftentimes determines what you see in life. So what are you looking for? Because what we look for, not what we look at, what we look for shapes our perspective. The way we view life, the way we view God's word, the way we see our marriages. And what shapes our perspective oftentimes becomes our reality. See, here's the thing. The spies, they were sent in to explore the land, not to evaluate the land, not to do a SWOT analysis of the land, not to determine if God was capable to do what God said he was do. That was not their task. Their task was just simply go explore the land. In fact, Moses told them, and when you explore the land, here's what I want you to look for. I want you to look for fruits, because fruit is the evidence of good things. Because fruit is the evidence of what God is already doing. But what do they look for? They look for fruit and everything that they weren't supposed to look for. So what do you look for? As you look into 2022, what are you looking for? In fact, notice what the 10 unbelieving spies fixated on. I'll list it for you. We're not able to go up against this people. They are stronger than we are. The land devours its inhabitants. The men are of great stature. The men are giants. They are from Anak, the land of giants. We are like grasshoppers in our eyes. We are like grasshoppers in their eyes. There's this leadership expert by the name of Simon Sinek. You may have heard of him. He tells this story about going to the park with one of his buddies. They went for a run, and after their run, he sees a table where they're giving out free bagels. Who likes a free bagel? Yeah, I'm a bagel kind of guy too, extra cream cheese. And so he says to his buddy, hey, free bagels, let's go get a free bagel. His buddy looks up and says, I don't want to wait in line. And up to that point, Simon, he hadn't really noticed that there was a line for the free bagels. And he says this, at that point, he realizes something, that there are two different ways to see the world. And I think this applies to our spiritual life as well. There are two different ways to see the world. You can look for the bagel or you can look for the line. Which one are you? Because if you look for the fruit, you'll find the fruit. If you look for the evidence of the hand of God in your life, you'll see the evidence of the hand of God in your life. If you look for the activity of God in our world, you'll see God at work all around. You'll see his handiwork in the majesty of creation. If you look for frustrations, you'll find those too. If you look for opportunities, you'll see those around. If you look for obstacles, you'll sure find some obstacles. Are you looking for what's possible, or are you simply looking for the problems? Are you the bagel person, or are you the line person? What are you looking for? Number 3 is this. What words am I speaking? What words am I speaking? What words am I speaking over my family? What words am I speaking over my kids? When I'm frustrated and they're tap dancing on my last nerve, what words am I speaking to them? What words am I speaking to my spouse? Or maybe not the words that you speak out loud, but your self-talk. Ooh. When the dishes aren't done right, because, you have a way, you're ADD, you arrange your dishes in the dishwasher, they just throw them in. Welcome to the Roberts household. Confession time, forgive me, Father, for I have sinned. What's the self-talk? What are you speaking? They say your words create worlds. The Bible tells us the power of life and death is in our tongue. Do you have a critical eye, or do you have a critical spirit? Ooh. Look at what he says, verse 30. Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, let us go up at once and occupy it, for we are well able to overcome it. Then the men who had gone up with him said, we're not able. We're not able to go up against this people, for they are stronger than we are. Come on, they're stronger than you? Did you forget what God just did to Pharaoh? Did you just forget how God led us through the wilderness with a cloud of fire, with a pillar of cloud during the day and a cloud of fire during the night? Remember when we were hungry and we're complaining and we thought that life and food was the Egyptian food was better? Remember how the Lord provided manna from heaven for us? Remember when we were between a rock and a hard place, the rock being the Red Sea in front of us and Pharaoh's army behind us? Remember how God was the way maker, miracle worker, promise keeper, and he parted the Red Sea and we walked on dry ground? Did you forget that? What do you mean they are stronger than we are? What are you saying? What words am I speaking? In fact, the report was so negative and so critical to a point that when we read Joshua chapter 14, verse 1, here's what it says. Then all the congregation raised a loud cry, and the people wept that night. And their critical spirit became so contagious that now everyone's feeling it. And it started off with 10 of them, and now 3 million of them are feeling the effects of that critical spirit. And the pessimism turned into its own pandemic that spreads throughout They can't. Too soon for that one? Pandemic, pessimism? No, I worked on that all week. Anyways. And it spreads throughout all the people to the point that God says, you know what? Enough of your grumbling. None of you are going to enter into the promised land, except for Joshua and Caleb. See, what I didn't read to you is in Numbers 13, there's about 6 or 7 verses where Moses lists out the names of the 12 spies. And if you were to read that list of 12 spies, you would not recognize 10 of those names. You would only recognize 2 of those names. And it's because of the 2 who believed and who trusted God. And here's why I know that we can be people of faith and hope, because in 2 Timothy 1, verse 7, the Apostle Paul, he says this, "For God has not given you a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind," or self-control, the ESV says. And so this year you can enter in to 2022 with confidence. And you can go all in with God. And I promise you that it will not be all for nothing, because God has not given you a spirit of fear, but a fear of power and love and of a sound mind. And so as we come to a close, I surprised Tiago. You know, he had a song plan, and I thought of an old song. I think you all know this song, especially if you grew up in church. And it's this hymn, it's this old chorus that I love to sing. It's called "Turn Your Eyes Upon Jesus." Remember that one? "Look full in his wonderful face, and the things of this world will go strangely dim in the light of his glory and grace." And so Tiago is going to lead us in this song. But I thought of our series theme, all in, all in, all in. If you're a poker person, you get it. You saw the poker chips. This is not an endorsement for gambling. You know, we have a support group for that. You know, so please no emails. You know, the pastor endorsed gambling. You can send those emails to Pastor Daryl at gotochrist.com. But I wanted to give us a visual reminder as we enter this year. And so on your way out, I want you to pick up a poker chip. This has no value. So if you go to Vegas or you go to Sycuan or Barona or whichever one they have here, and you try to use this, they will arrest you. Okay, and don't call me, because I warned you. But I want you to take 1 or 2 and you put in your wallet, put in your car, put in your, you know, where you put your change in your car, just as a little reminder that, God, this year I'm going to go all in with you. That I'm going to be a person of prayer. That I'm going to engage in the next 21 days of prayer and fasting. And God, I'm going to watch what I say. I'm going to watch that critical spirit in my heart. I'm going to speak life over my kids. God, I'm going to look for what you're doing, not at what you're not doing. God, I'm going to believe your promises there for me. That you're going to take me into that land of blessing. And blessing is not money. Are you going to take me into that land of peace and joy and that fulfillment and deep connection with you? That you will satisfy the thirst and the longing of my soul like never before. And so I want this to be a reminder for us that this year we're going to go all in. And then tomorrow we begin our 21 days of prayer and fasting. And I'm encouraging, if you weren't here last week, I encourage you to join us. Again, like I said, this is meant to challenge you. It's not meant to kill you. And so there's several options for different types of fasts that you can engage in. There's a primer that you could pick up on the way out, and it just has a note from me and different ideas. And I challenge us to do this together. And every Thursday for the next 3 weeks, we're going to gather together. We're going to pray as a church family. And you watch what God does in your life. There's this great verse in the Old Testament where God says, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven. I will forgive their sins, and I will heal their land. And I'm praying that as we put God first, this is what this is about. It's not a diet. It's us putting God first. we will see God show up in our lives and in our church and in our world in a powerful way because we want to seek him first. And so let's pray together, and then we're going to end with this song, Turn Our Eyes Upon Jesus. So, Father, I just thank you that you're calling us to go all in with you. And that there is power when we go all in with you. And so, Father, I pray that you would challenge us with these questions. Whose word are we going to believe? What are we looking for? And what words am I speaking? And we know, Father, that we can walk in confidence this year, that if we go all in with you, it will not be all for nothing, because we will experience the all in all power of your presence in our lives. And so right now we turn our eyes to you. In the midst of what's going on in our world, we choose to turn our eyes to you. And everybody says, amen.